Thank you for listening to the audio-described walkthrough of The Mine by Jay Price. For an audiobook of the project, including spoken versions of all texts in the game, please visit shapearts.org.uk. You face stone steps, leading to the doors of a gallery located in a street from the Edwardian era. It's nighttime, but the steps are downlit by a lamp in the entrance. Silhouettes appear behind a window of frosted glass as a gathering takes place inside the gallery. You turn aside, passing iron railings, a metal waste bin and bin bags. You pass a tatty sign, but the wording is unclear. You take the steps down beneath the gallery and come to a shadowed wall. Turning right, you come to a dark red door and push it open. You enter a large, unlit basement. The gloom is lit by car headlights driving by outside. On the floor is a torch which you pick up and check over. The battery reading is low. Overhead run the gallery floorboards. Narrow gaps between them let slices of light through. There are shadows of people moving above. Your torch picks out odd shapes, silhouettes, the bust of a mannequin. It's a forgotten place of old, heavy bricks, dusty surfaces and grime. High in the facing wall, stained glass windows glow briefly as traffic goes by. Fitted close to the ceiling in landscape format, they resemble scenes from church windows. The same wall opens into a wooden staircase with slender struts, some broken, that turns as it ascends to the gallery level above. You find a no entry sign at the bottom of the stairs, hanging on a cordon that blocks the way up. A worn mattress lies slumped against the wall. You walk on. Human ballast is graffitied beneath the stained glass. Discarded floorboards are propped up in the far corner. Turning right, you pass before an enclave. There is an archway. It looks like the apse of a church, with some kind of altar-like table within it. You return to the stained glass windows. Two saint-like figures with halos reach out to one another, one each side of a landscape of green hills, out of which a sun rises, flanked by doves in flight. The small figure on the left is held in place by a modern figure wearing a lab coat, who attends to the childlike figure's arm. Projected text appears.
I miss my big brother. He was the only one here who was kind to me. He slept on the other ward with the bigger children, and the nurses say he left on the buses last week to our new home. Our parents sent us here as they said something wasn't right with us, but they didn't make our sisters come. It's quiet as there aren't many of us left. I like the quiet, but my stomach is being noisy as we haven't had a meal in days. I have to go now. We have to wash and shower before we can travel to our new home, and I can see my brother again.
Commentary text reads, "The Action T4 campaign was a secret operation in 1939 implemented by the Nazi Party for the involuntary euthanasia of disabled children. Many children were kept in homes and dedicated hospitals when their families did not want or could not care for them. The children were transported to their murder in unmarked buses with curtains covering the windows. They were overdosed with drugs and lethal injections, starved, and gassed in chambers disguised as showers, among other methods. Doctors and nurses committed the murders. Even religious asylums allowed their young inmates to be taken to extermination centres, set up in 6 psychiatric hospitals. Parents were not consulted, and were usually told lies about how their children died. Eyewitnesses describe this worst-kept secret, and how many knew the purpose of the death buses, as passing children would joke outside. The buses were eventually painted grey to make them less obvious. There were public protests which led to the programme's apparent suspension for a time in 1941. However, the killings continued until the end of World War II in 1945. This campaign was the only time Hitler personally signed documents linking him to mass murder. After successful beginnings, they extended the campaign to disabled adults. The lessons learned killing disabled children directly fed into the constructions of concentration camps of Jews, Roma, Sinti, homosexuals, black people, and those whose religious or political opinions conflicted with Nazi ideology. We are, as always, the canaries in the mine. There is a cluttered heap of packing boxes beneath the staircase at the opposite end of the room. You move towards them. On the way, you pass an emergency exit. A notice reads, "Evacuation plan. Get out as no one is coming for you." Now you're at the boxes. Behind a stepladder, a large rectangular plaque is mounted on the wall, made of a series of engraved tiles, the inscriptions faded and worn with age. The one legible sentence under the title piece reads, "In memoriam for those who died after being declared fit for work by the DWP." Turning away, you discover old protest leaflets on the floor. Their bright colours and imagery provide a moment of vibrancy. On the floor near to the wall is a modern £5 note in good condition. Text projects from it. The polymer £5 note featuring Sir Winston Churchill entered circulation in 2016. Churchill was the United Kingdom's Prime Minister from 1940 to 1945 and 1951 until 1955, and won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953. He was the honorary vice president of the British Eugenics Society and believed that the feeble-minded, the insane, and different races posed a threat to society, and that eugenics would solve race deterioration and reduce crime and poverty. He was one of the early drafters for the Mental Deficiency Act of 1913, which defined grades of mental defective people. Imbeciles, idiots, feeble-minded and moral imbeciles, who could be confined for life in institutions. In a 2002 BBC poll, Winston Churchill was voted the greatest Briton by the British public. Going down a step, you come across an old-fashioned printing press in antique browns and with numerous metal parts. It stands in the middle of the basement, complete with gears, stamps and rollers, and a dark, flat bed. As you examine it, a car drives past outside, briefly casting light. Text projects from it as follows. The printing press is both a functional item of revolutionary potential and a symbol of hope. When platforms are not provided within society or the art world for certain groups, when the world lets us down, when it is outdated or elitist, that is where printmaking steps in to inspire, with its revolutionary potential as both art form and political act. It's lower cost, it's reproducible, and it's based on a history of mass dissemination, consumption, and bringing content to groups outside of the privileged elite. Underground printing press groups have fought oppression, challenged propaganda, or the status quo. It seems that when art has been revolutionary, the workings of that power are often overlooked. Art can change the world, but in addition, we, disabled communities, need to build our own platforms to break down walls, building steps for one another. Dissemination is a method of survival without a privileged source of income or the platform of a gallery. The affordable and the free becomes an act of defiance against the system to save the system. It infiltrates and introduces voices that would otherwise be excluded, making art relatable and tangible to a wider group of people. Change is fought for and rarely freely given. Moving away, you approach the apse-like enclave. On the right is a fluted semi-column built into the arch. Upon it sits the small statue of a deer clamped in the jaws of a lion, which has seized it from behind. You head towards the table. Draped across its middle is an altar cloth of heavy linen. It's lined down one side and crested with a burgundy cross within a circle. The table is unlike any you have come across before. Some text stands out. From the master craftsperson. The top of the altar is inspired by the marble dissection table from the Kaufbeuren e.C. psychiatric hospital that was used to conduct experiments on physically and mentally impaired children. The base of the altar is influenced by the trolleys that wheeled away the bodies of those who died during those experiments. Moving on again, you shine the torch upon a tall rectangular plaque of etched brass figures. There are 3 of them, each with halos and robed-like depictions of saints. They appear above an ornately finished lower plaque, on which text is engraved and apparently scribbled over with ink or paint, effectively defacing it. You turn to your left, where, on a longer wall, a tableau of dingy figures appears. Above the brass figures, almost touching the ceiling beams, is another stained glass window. It shows a colourful parade of modern-day figures marching right to left in protest. Clad in modern dress, the diverse figures are holding placards. From the inclusion of people using crutches and wheelchairs, we infer it to be a disability rights march. Facing back into the room, you encounter another mounted plaque, but are unable to interact with it. You need to find a specific object in order to do so. You go to the opposite end of the enclave, heading for a shinier, undamaged plaque displaying the side profile of a male figure. Turning into the larger space, the torch passes over a statue fixed upon the other semi-column of the arch. What appears to be a gargoyle turns out to be a cherub throttling a duck. You linger for a moment on the floorboards overhead. Another car passes. More slants of light cross the room through the coloured glass. On an adjacent wall, Scroungers is scrawled in black. Above the graffiti, a window scene depicts 2 figures in blue NHS-style scrubs. One with a surgical hat, and both with pandemic-era masks. One figure holds a clipboard with papers marked DNR. A patient with a halo lies on a bed, apparently dead behind the clinicians, profiled before slanting sun rays. Projected text appears in 2 parts as follows.
My beautiful boy. His hand is so cold, but I can't let it go. They said his heart stopped beating, but why didn't they try to save him? He was so happy. He had an infectious laugh, he loved cars, and there was nothing he didn't know about engines. He was building a kit car with his dad. My husband is waiting out in the car park as they would only let one of us in. How am I going to tell him?
The COVID-19 pandemic has illustrated clearly the value placed on disabled people's lives in present-day society, and how acceptable that treatment is considered by most of the public. Anti-mask and anti-vax movements imprisoned those with certain high-risk conditions in their homes. The recurring comment circulated that those who were dying were only those with pre-existing conditions in the elderly. And DNA CPR, do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation notices, were applied to disabled people in hospitals without their or their families' consent. Blanket do not resuscitate orders were placed on the records of people with learning disabilities in both the first and second waves of the pandemic in the United Kingdom. The Care Quality Commission in December 2020 stated that it had caused potentially avoidable deaths, yet the practice was reported as continuing the following year. You pick out the Scroungers graffiti again, the paint stained in long drips down from the text, before another cast around the room. Back at the printing press, you find blocks of white paper and wax rubbing sticks on the flat bed. You pick both of them up. You scan the room, the cardboard boxes, the graffiti, and the crumbling brick walls. Then go back through the darkness to the altar table. You go around the table and place the paper over the surface of the tableau that you paused at before. You rub with the wax, making strong diagonal strokes from top to bottom. Stark monochrome images appear. Skeletal human figures heaped and clustered together like an apocalyptic scene from a Goya painting. They are naked and heaped upon each other in a scene of agony and despair. Skeletal and pale, they flail and reach and hold their heads, trapped in nightmarish captivity, like people condemned to eternal damnation. As you move away, your torch catches the burnished sheen of the engraving. You cast around the now familiar shapes of boxes and barricaded stairs and the strange array of forgotten objects. The leaflets and plaques and stained glass windows. The darkness intensifies. Car headlights stream through the stained glass image of a female form lying naked on a clinical bed, with medical staff at work on her. A halo glows around her head. You are picking out another window when the battery display flashes on your torch. The light goes out. The game is over. You must decide if you want to play again.